Really reviewed these problems. I'll just go over some quick things. These are kind of some of the easier. I think they're a little bit easier, 1 through 4 on practice exam A. But just some kind of tips and tricks to like not make any obvious mistakes. So here I've got 5 different UFC fighters. What's the mean age of these fighters? So if I'm looking at their age, right? Which of these answers could I actually rule out right away? Before I even go to the formula, I can rule A and B out because if I look at this age, remember, mean, median, mode, they're all a measure of where the center of this data is. How can the center of my age be values that are greater than the oldest person in that data set, right? How can the middle point of the data be 43 when the maximum is only 41? So right away, we know that mean has to be somewhere between what? The maximum and the minimum, so 41 and 28. So C and D are the only ones that make sense there. Now, I think that one's pretty easy. Do you really need to identify the formula on the formula sheet? Probably not, but here it is, right? You're just adding up all those values, dividing by the number of numbers you have. So you would add up these 5 ages and then divide by 5, right? You've got 5 different observations here. If I'm looking at this, I'm going to guess it's 35, but it may not be. So what, 32 plus 41 plus 37 plus 37 plus 28 over 5. Yeah, it ends up being 35. Right? And with a data set this small, it comes a little bit easier. Like I really had no idea what that, but you can kind of eyeball like where the middle of that data is going to be. Right? Yeah, so no matter if we're looking for a population or a sample mean, we're still dividing by the number of observations we have in the data set. Yep. What you're thinking about, and we'll kind of jump in the gun, but we'll go to that right now, is let's say I wanted to find a variance or a standard deviation, but I'm looking for a sample variance or a sample standard deviation. Right? Now, this is one of those where, I don't want you to calculate the mean wrong, and then so I assume that the average height of these fighters is 71.6 inches, I guess, here. What's the sample standard deviation? Well, we go to our formula sheet. We've got our standard deviations here, which all this is telling us is the square root of the variance, right? In order to find the standard deviation, we first have to find the variance. So here's my population variance, where I divide by the number of observations. Here's my sample variance, which reminds me you divide by the number of observations minus 1. And what I do is I go through every observation, take its difference from the mean, right? Subtract the mean from it, then square that value, and then add them all up. Right? So what I'd be doing here is going through each one. Go to the first observation, 69 minus 71.6, square that value. Maybe I don't want to do this all in one long equation, so maybe I write that number down. Then 74 minus 71.6, square that value, write that number down. I do that for all 5 observations and then add them all up, right? That will give me the numerator, okay? Once I have that numerator, so I'll do it real quick so we can put a number to it. So let's say, so we got what? 69 minus 71.6 squared plus 74 minus, is it 71.6? Yeah, squared plus 73 minus 71.6 squared plus 71.6 squared. What's the last one? 68. So our numerator, I think, should be, if I entered everything incorrect there in my calculator real fast, 33.2. So I just calculated the sum of all those deviations squared, and I get, what did I say, 33.2. Okay. Any more paper? I have some here. Should have had some. Should have had a bunch. So I had, that numerator was 33.2. I then need to be dividing it by n minus 1 because I had sample data. So we had 5 observations, so 33.2 divided by 5 minus 1, or 33.2 divided by 4. I should get 8.3, right? But then I select 8.3 as my answer. Well, remember, what did we find here? I was using the equation for the variance. There was one more step, right? Which is if I want the standard deviation, I have to take the square root of the variance. So the square root of, what did I say this was, 8.3? All right. So I have one more step there to find the standard deviation. I take the square root of that and I end up with 2.88. Okay. So I kind of like didn't write down, I just kind of audibly said kind of how we found that numerator. But really the key here I want to point out is if you're looking for a sample standard deviation, we're dividing by n minus 1. If it was a population, we would have just divided by n. And then to find that standard deviation, we have one more step, which was take the square root. Do you have a question?
Yeah, it doesn't say sample. Will it always say sample or population?
Yeah, so I'll identify whether or not the data, maybe the problem might not have it quite as bolded here, right? So pay very close attention to what it's asking. But there will be somewhere within the information given, like I'm identifying and trying to highlight, like this is sample data, or it's not, right? It's population data. Yep. If we want to find the median, right? So we want to find the median weight here. So we've got weight. Which of these answers can I rule out right away? Similar to the mean, the median is a measure of where the middle of the data is. So which of these answers don't make sense in problem 2? Not A and, let's say A and D? Yeah, A and D, right? Because 73 and 71.6, well, that's less than the lowest weight I have here, right? That's less than 143. How can the middle part of the data be lower than the minimum, right? So right away, I know either or B or C is going to make sense. Now, from there, I actually technically could figure out what it is here. Like, even if I didn't go through and calculate it, which one of these do I also know I can rule out? C, because in an odd numbered data set, my median has to be one of the values in the data set, right? So, because I'll be left with one middle value, right? If it was even, all bets are off because I'm going to have to find the average of the last 2 that are left. So here, I automatically know right away it has to be 185, right? But if I gave you some more answers that made sense, right, what would we do? Well, we'd rearrange these, or we'd think about, okay, I'll cross off the lowest, cross off the highest, cross off the next highest, the next lowest, and now I'm left with one middle value, which is my median, right? 50% of the observations are above that value, 50% of the observations are below it. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. So just kind of reviewing some things just to make these a little bit easier, honestly. I just wanted to make sure I point out some of the pitfalls, ways you can rule out certain answers. And that's, one thing just as advice for the exam, especially on the multiple choice, like just always think about the principles of what the statistic you're looking for is. Like before you even go into it, just think about where it's bounded, right? If I am asked for a variance or a standard deviation, the first thing I should do just to make the problem easier, look and see, and I don't think it's on practice exam A, I think practice exam B has this. Excuse me. But if I look here, oh, maybe not. It's not on the variance, but it's on like the weighted, if I'm asked like down here for a standard deviation or a variance, right away, if I look down at the answers and I see a negative value, just cross that, like in your mind, I guess you can't like cross it off on the screen, but like in your mind, eliminate that right away, okay?